Welcome back to Retro Wednesday at the Tydirium Hangar. This is Mike, and today I want to talk to you about my top 40 vintage toy lines. No, I'm not Casey Kasem or Rick Dees. This isn't music, this is toys. Yes, I've done a top 10, and my top 10 has changed just a little bit, but I'm doing a top 40. I haven't seen anyone else do it. We're going to cover this real fast. Coming up. Number 40 on my list is the Shopper Filmation Ghostbusters. Now, this toy line is actually pretty cool as toy lines go. The figures look really good. They look like their on-screen counterparts, and there's a lot of stuff for them to interact with a playset that is almost impossible to find, but it is really cool haunted house looking playset. And you do have the Bone Troller, which is gigantic, and the Buggy, the Ghostbusters Ghost Buggy, and a couple of other smaller vehicles. But overall, the toy line is pretty cool. Not a whole lot of articulation for the time, but I think this toy line blows away what they did with the real Ghostbusters. Number 39 on my list is Galaxy Rangers. Galaxy Rangers is one of those toy lines that didn't make it to the US, and its show was pretty fun. It was a pretty interesting show. Kind of, in one way, the toys fit in well with Brave Star and all of that. But on the other hand, the show is a little bit different. It's not the same. But it has one of the best theme songs ever and kind of a fun space romp. Tracking down the toys is going to be very hard because there weren't very many released, and only in select areas. The hardest part seems to be the horses. The horses were shared with another toy line called Golden Girls. Number 38 on my list is Jace and the Wheeled Warriors. And the thing about this toy line is that it's based on a cartoon that has an awesome intro also, but it's more about the machines. It's about the vehicles. Even though the show was a lot about the characters, the toy line is about the vehicles. This toy line seemed to be about the building craze that was going on back then, where you would build them and customize these tiny little vehicles with even smaller drivers. So kind of cool, kind of interesting. I didn't have any as a kid. I have a few today, but I don't know how deep I'm going to go on this toy line. It's still kind of fun. And all the chrome, it's awesome. Number 37 on my list is Dino Riders. And you're going to see some different manufacturer names on it, like Ideal or Tyco or Mattel. But one thing that's sure about this is a hard line to collect with a lot of different parts and figures that are about the size of the Kinder Mask. One thing that's really cool about this toy line is that you do have giant dinosaurs in comparison to the figures and the little figures that ride in there. So the scale looks pretty good, and you get big dinosaurs, you get some small dinosaurs, but they all have some sort of weapons and accessories to go along with them to battle them up. Wonder if this would ever see a resurgence. Pretty cool toy line. Number 36 on my list is Clash of the Titans, which is, it's kind of cool that they actually made a toy line from Clash of the Titans, and fun movie from back in the day. But the thing about this is that getting your hands on that giant Kraken, then release the Kraken, that's getting kind of pricey these days. The figures themselves, with the sword and the shield, is about the same sword with each figure, same shield, and you get the Pegasus. So some fun stuff to a really, really small toy line. I don't really know what other characters they'd have wanted to make in this. There's a few good ones on my short list, like maybe Medusa. Number 35 on my list is Remco's Karate Kid. Now, these figures have some action features, some chopping and kicking and stuff going on with them. And I really did not think they were that great of figures back in the day. But now looking at them today, they actually are pretty good representations of the characters and the actors and all of that. The recent Cobra Kai series kind of shot these up in price. People have been going after them. And it's kind of fun to track them down and get a set of them. But it's a very redundant toy line. They basically made 4 or 5 different versions of the exact same figure over and over and over. So getting all the variations is probably the problem. Just pick the one you like the most of each character. That's the way to go. It also has a couple of play sets that went with it that are getting harder and harder to track down. Still kind of fun overall. Number 34 on my list is Chuck Norris and the Karate Commandos. The thing about this is that this was a very short-lived toy line and hit the clearance bins quick back in the day. But it was based on a cartoon. It had its own cartoon show. But most of what drove this toy line were Chuck Norris's movies, his various different movies that he had going on in the 80s. And I think the star power is really what drove this toy line. And it didn't last very long, although it was kind of fun, and I think everybody I grew up with had 1, 2, or 3 of these figures in their collection. I didn't know anybody that had this Corvette, so it's really the only other thing you get with the toy line aside from the figures is the Corvette. This is the playset and vehicle all in one. It actually is pretty cool. It's kind of like a Barbie Corvette, except a little smaller. Number 33 on my list is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from the 80s, and the vintage toys were based on this cartoon. Actually, originally a comic book, and then that drove the cartoon, which then drove the toys. But the cartoon I fought off as a kid. I didn't want to get in something new. I was loyal to all my G.I. Joes and Transformers and stuff like that I had before, but after a while, it wore on me. Had to break down and buy the toys. There were so many toys in this toy line. They made all kinds of figures and characters, and it just kind of got crazy and goofy how they reinvented the Turtles also. But there was a Terradrome and the sewer playset and all the Technodrome. All this stuff going on with this toy line. Just so much to it. There's a lot out there, and it's kind of exhausting. Reason this is low on the list, it came out in late 80s and was quickly a loss of interest from me. But now I like the NECA versions so much more. The modern iterations of these turtles aren't all squatty and constipated looking. Number 32 on my list is Supernaturals. Now, the thing about this Supernaturals is the fact that these figures had the holograms on them, competing with other hologram figures back in the day. You did have some taller figures. I think there were 6 tall ones, and then there were 8 of the smaller ghostlings. This toy line also came with a playset, the Tomb of Doom. Of course, you got to pay for that. And it's interesting, it's small, there's very little going on with this playset, and it's kind of cool that it's small, and you could put, I think, up to 10 figures with it, so it's good and bad at the same time. It also had a flashlight underneath that big skull, so there's interesting things to this. This toy line also came with a couple of cars and a couple of beasts, so there was a lot more to this toy line than I ever knew as a kid, and as an adult collector, kind of fun to track down. Number 31 on my list is the 1989 Batman toy line. And this is fun for a lot of reasons. First off, the 1989 movie is one of the most pivotal changes in the Batman series. It got dark, it got serious, but still a little fun and campy at the same time. Cool thing about this is you did get a Batwing, there was a Bat Cave playset, several figures, but the Batmobile will go down in history as a bit of a fail with that open, no canopy. It's just all open on that Batmobile. They made a better one down the road, but still, this toy line, it's fun. Number 30 on my list is A-Team. Now, these, I believe, are glue, and these are the 6-inch figures or the 5.5-inch figures, and they're not the greatest figures in the world, but they give you a good representation of the characters from back in the day and some what seem to be no-name bad guys. I really don't know where they got the bad guys from, but looking at this, at least we got the girl in this, so that works. Surprising to find out they actually made the Amy Allen figure, and they also made figures in the 3.75-inch scale. Number 29 on my list is Kenner RoboCop. Yes, Kenner, the greatest toy line of all times, or the toy company of all times. This toy line actually was based on a cartoon, and this is pretty much everything that was made for the toy line. There's also some concept stuff out there, some prototypes that never got made. But these figures, there are a couple of figures that you could say were related or correlated to the movie, but the rest of it was just kind of made up for this cartoon show. The show was not very popular, so the toy line did not last very long. But look what all Kenner put out, what all Kenner did with this toy line. It's pretty cool, it's pretty awesome. Later on, you get to see Toy Island in the 90s picks up with RoboCop and makes more movie-accurate stuff, vehicles, figures, but this was a fun time back in the 80s. Number 28 on my list is Battle Beasts. Now, the thing about Battle Beasts, they were originally brought over from Takara, of course, released by Hasbro, and they're tiny little, 1.5-inch figures, and they made a lot of them. I think there's between 76, 78 of these figures that have been released. They each have their little weapons, and they also have some chest rub symbols on them that you can either have wood, water, or fire, and you can decide, is this rock, paper, scissors? That kind of a game. Who beats who? Who's better than who? Who's stronger than who? They are really cool looking figures, and I've seen some great looking displays. Also comes with 3 little bases, or I don't know if you'd want to call them a base or a playset, kind of like Micro Machine playsets. Number 27 on my list is Blackstar. John Blackstar. There was a TV show about this toy line from the early 80s, and these figures are kind of cool. Actually, I prefer the look, aesthetic, and build of these figures to the vintage Masters of the Universe figures. So with that, these hold up better in the long term. The internal construction's a little bit better, and they're not squatty pose. I like the taller, full, stood up pose. Well, some of them have a squatty pose, but these are a lot of fun to collect nowadays. I've seen some really impressive collections, and there's so much to this line. The absolute coolest part of this toy line is this. This is the castle, and I think they call it the Ice Castle, and it is a really awesome looking playset. It doesn't do a whole lot, but just look awesome. Number 26 on my list is Revell's Power Lords. Now, this is one of those toy lines that's not very known or popular, but I had the Atom Power as a kid. I always was intrigued by the flip around torso gimmick, but they had a lot of varying different characters, ton of articulation for the time, and it was really a pretty good toy line if only they had their own cartoon and not just the animated shorts that you saw in the commercials. The playset, the Vulcan Rock playset, was really awesome, and this was good enough to get a second series of figures. This second series of figures, for some reason people say it's a third series of figures, but I believe it's only the second series. Some of the coolest, most interesting designs ever in action figure history, but sadly, the toy line ended and Revell just went back to making model kits. Or is it Revell? Number 25 on my list is Vintage Tron Toys by Tomy. Back in the day, these translucent figures that had some paint on them to kind of give you the feel that you were in Tron, that your figures came out of the computer and they were from Tron. The light cycles, they had the ripcord actions, they'd go really fast. Collecting these this day and age, the light cycles are going to have torn up wheels from being used excessively and ramming into things. And the figures themselves are actually getting hard to find with the little discs and the staff and all that kind of stuff. Still a really fun toy line to collect. There's not a lot to it, just I think 4 figures and 2 or 3 light cycles to get, but it starts getting confusing this day and age because NECA came out with more light cycles and more figures. Disney made more light cycles, so kind of confusing backtracking and trying to get all of the stuff. But for the vintage era, there wasn't very much to collect. Collect all 4. Number 24 on my list is Kenner's Indiana Jones. Now, this is lower on the list, not because it's a bad toy line, just because it's really hard to collect the very few things that were even made for it. There wasn't much made for this toy line, and there were problems when they released it. Nobody could seem to get the Indiana Jones figure, and all the other figures clogged pegs, so no new shipments came in, so no new Indiana Jones showed up, so the toy line evidently failed. So the problem with that is that Hasbro learned from that mistake, doubled down, and created a new mistake. Too many Indiana Jones figures that clogged up the shelves, and you couldn't get any other characters. Well, unless it was from Crystal Skull. Starts to make me wonder what's going to happen in 2023 when they come out with Indiana Jones 5. Number 23 on my list is LJN Dune, and the thing about this toy line is it was made by LJN, and the figures were bigger than I expected them to be. They have some action feature gimmick where you push a lever and they either move the torso or the arms flail, but they do come with a bunch of accessories which are hard to track down this day and age. Only 6 figures were made. A sandworm, you've got this big vehicle going on there, and you got a bunch of smaller vehicles that aren't actually part of the toy line, but they're not integrated with the figures. So still looking at it, it's a fun toy line to go after. Since it's not very big and not super expensive, it makes it a little bit more fun and realistic and attainable to collect. Oddly enough, even after this last movie came out, there's not a surge in demand for this toy line. Number 22 on my list is Chris Starr. Now, there's a lot of confusion about this toy line for me personally. I had some of this stuff back in the day when I was a kid, but I had no idea why I had it and what show it was based on, because it wasn't based on a show. So there is a comic book that supports this toy line. It is kind of cool because you have some transparent figures with transparent accessories, and then you have the bad guys that aren't transparent, and then you also have a flying dragon. So cool, so much fun, so much magic. But where Black Star had their ice castle, this is a crystal castle, and this is really cool looking, really awesome, really hard to find, so I think I missed the boat on ever picking one of these up, but it's still fun to enjoy from afar. Number 21 on my list is the Inhumanoids. Now, this is another one of those weird toy lines. I had one figure back in the day, but I didn't realize how much more there was to it and how much bigger, literally bigger, the toy line was. Now, these large ones, like Tendril, Metlar, and Decompose, are massive, and yes, they would work very well battling Voltron, so really a cool, big, giant toy, but they were kind of cheaply made because they were so big to make them affordable, and so these days, finding one that's not broken somewhere and stands on its own is pretty challenging. Also, the scientists, the Earth Core scientists, getting them with their helmets and all their accessories is kind of hard. And notice in this picture, some of this stuff is actually prototypes. They look different. Number 20 on my list is the vintage He-Man and Masters of the Universe. Now, this was higher in my top 10, but I got to realizing that I wasn't so into the vintage. I'm more into the modern origins. The original figures don't have a whole lot of articulation, and they break really easily. There's a lot of issues with that, so I stay away from vintage as much as I can. I'm going for the origins, the modern stuff, but you have to admit, the source material was good, and so with that, that's why Masters of the Universe is having a massive resurgence, because of such a great cartoon, such great source material, and the toys are still very iconic. Number 19 on my list is Cops and Crooks. Now, this toy line is a lot of fun to collect, and I have to admit that this has fallen on my list out of my top 10 simply because of the fact that I guess I completed the line and moved on to other things, bigger and better things, but still, good points about this toy line is that they're already 6-inch figures. They would work well with your Star Wars Black Series or any of these other 6-inch figure lines like G.I. Joe that's out there, so it already works. A lot of people are saying that they'd like to see new modern iterations of them, but the designs are already so good that we don't need modern ones. Also came with about 9 vehicles in the line, 29 figures, so a lot of fun to collect, and still today a great looking toy line. Number 18 on my list of vintage 80s toys, and this is the Coleco Sectars. So there's a lot of cool stuff about this that I passed over as a kid. Well, there was just so much competition, you couldn't be in all of it. But as an adult, looking back on it, there's some real impressive things that Coleco did with this toy line. First off, that big giant playset, the Hive, was huge. It doesn't do a lot, though. It's got a few action features and stuff, but you climb the Hive. It's cool. Still, with that, the puppets that they use for the large riding vehicles, they call them the mounts, those vehicles actually have wings that flap, and then if they didn't have the wings that flap, the mouths then and that move, and then you have claws that grab and stuff like that. Action features that work pretty well, but the figures themselves, there's only 9 figures with whichever one of their pets or companions, whether it's a small or a large. Cool toy line, a lot of fun. Number 17 on my list is the LJN Thundercats. Now, this toy line is big, way bigger than I thought it would be. And now looking back on it, it's got a huge following. A lot of people really love this toy line. And I didn't love the toy line, but I started collecting it mostly because I had a Lion-O as a kid. I still had a Lion-O, and I started picking up a few here and there, as cheap as I could. But then I found myself with a big problem. Completing it, you're buying a lot of figures that cost over $100 each. So that is a problem. That is a challenge. And then the vehicles so much, I just don't see myself collecting all of them. Although they are kind of cool, and there's a lot of interesting stuff. The integration with the playset, that cat lair, it's big, it's cool, and it's pricey. Maybe Super 7 will give us a cat lair. There are certain things I think that should get made in the modern era, but maybe they're more expensive, but by these other independent companies, and the cat lair is prime for that. Number 16 on my list is the Kenner Silverhawks, and of course, Kenner, the greatest toy company ever. And these things are great to collect as adult collectors because they look good, they're shiny. But the problem is, if they've been played with, then there's not much shine left. So that is the challenge with collecting these, getting them in decent condition and them looking good. But if you get some halfway decent looking ones on a shelf, even with some dents, dings, and scratches and paint rub, they'll still have an impressive display. They display well as a collection of toys. As toys to play with, they are absolutely terrible. Absolutely terrible. No fun to play with as a kid, but lots of fun to look at on a shelf. Captain Power is another one of these toy lines that is shiny, and it makes the number 15 on my list. Now, some of these figures have the vac metallized shine to them like we saw back in the 80s. Some did not. And two of these figures in the bottom right never got made. Well, they did, but they didn't. They got made, but not a widespread release. So that's the big problem with this toy line, is the coolest stuff was saved for the last, and it didn't make it to a full mass market release. Hunting down something like the Skybikes with the Skybike launcher, the Magnacycle, the ATL, ARTL, I'm not sure what that's called, I forgot, and the Proton Sauron Proton Beam Deflector. Those are going to be hard to find because they were never released in the US and just in small quantities overseas, but still a fun toy line if you can track it down. Number 14 on my toy lines of the 80s in my top 40. Number 14 is the Panache Place Voltron. This was really a good toy line because it had a castle, you had figures went inside of the Voltron, and there were bad guy ships and all that kind of stuff. More things that you could get with it. A playset's always nice, the center of this, but the downside was the Voltron itself was kind of goofy looking, and so for me myself, I had the Matchbox, and I looked at this one as a downgrade, even though you could put the figures in it, which is really cool. It's really awesome. Wished it would have just looked a little bit better in combined mode. Didn't have all the issues that it had with the chest not lining up if you want to move the arms and all that kind of stuff. But still, it's a good Voltron overall. Looking back on it, the toy line overall was great. Number 13 on my list is still Voltron, and it's Matchbox. So Matchbox, in my mind, beats it out because the Voltron looks so good. It wins over Panache Place because it looks so good. And also, they had a vehicle Voltron, which I was surprised, because I never had it as a kid, to find out that the vehicle Voltron wasn't made of all die-cast, pretty much like the Lions were. The Lions were mostly die-cast, but it was very hefty. And then you grab the larger 15-inch vehicle Voltrons. Vehicles should be made of die-cast, but yet it's all plastic, or mostly plastic. So that was a surprise to me. Still really cool. They still look great to this day, and they display very well on your shelf to this day as some of the best representations of these characters. Number 12 on my list is Brave Star, and I feel like as a kid I didn't give it a chance. I did not give Brave Star a chance at all, mostly because of the fact that the figures did not scale with anything else I was collecting at the time, and so I just kind of felt like I wasn't into it. And the whole space cowboy thing didn't really intrigue me. But as an adult collector, this is a very interesting and fun toy line. More to it than I thought. Still less characters than I wish they would have made. I wish they would have at least made the female judge and a few other of those characters. And that would have been probably Series 2 had it been more successful. But the fact that it wasn't so successful makes some of them a little hard to get. Overall, this is still a very easy toy line to collect for the most part. Just watch out for the broken 3030s. Number 11 on my list is Spiral Zone by Tonka. Now, this toy line was a little ahead of its time with the cloth goods that it utilized and all of the interesting add-on weapons and gear. So, it's almost like you took the 12-inch G.I. Joes, shrunk them down to 6-inch, but kept everything with all of the gear, but made it more futuristic and space type of gear. Now, getting these figures complete can be a challenge, but it's even harder to get the vehicles complete. So the vehicles out there weren't very many, and from what I'm understanding, just weren't very many in the stores to begin with. So trying to track down the vehicles would be hard. Figures not so hard. Fun toy line to collect, a bit frustrating. So number 10 on my list is GoBots. And the thing about the GoBots are they're perceived as losing to Transformers. Transformers beat them, theoretically. And there's a lot of GoBots out there. They have Super GoBots and play sets and all of that. But the thing I like the most is they scale well with each other, and that works for the most part. So having figures that scale well and they match their on-screen counterpart. There was a great cartoon that went along with it. A lot of people say the cartoon was terrible. I actually enjoyed it for what it is. It's nothing too over the top and too wonderful, but it wasn't a bad cartoon. Like people say, still one of the best toy lines ever made. GoBots. Number 9 on my list is Kenner Superpowers. Kenner, the greatest toy company ever. And the thing about this is that there are 33 figures made from characters based on the Super Friends and all that kind of stuff back in the day. Was there a specific Superpowers cartoon? Now, I'm looking through and I'm seeing all different iterations of cartoons, but for the most part, this is a toy line compiled of all of these great superheroes and is a bit fun. But some of the later series figures are hard to get, and they're getting pricey and expensive and almost impossible to get your hands on, so it gets a little more frustrating. Plus, some of the parts and pieces and the accessories can cost more than you could expect. More than a car. No. But it's fun. There are vehicles and playsets. I do have the Hall of Justice. I reviewed it on this channel, and I'm going to eventually get the rest of these parts and pieces and review the entire toy line. Number 8 on my list is Visionaries. Visionaries is one of those fun toy lines from Hasbro back in the day, and it does have 4 vehicles and 12 figures, and of course Hasbro had to pack figures with the vehicles, and those are the harder ones to get. So the ones that were pack-ins are more challenging, and the ones individual have the staffs and are a little easier to find. But overall, still a fun toy line. Still with only 4 vehicles and 12 figures, it is very attainable to get this toy line. Number 7 on my list is Coleco Rambo. Coleco Rambo is still a fun, easy toy line to collect this day and age, based off of the cartoon Force of Freedom back in the day, in the 80s. But here's the thing, a lot of these figures, well, the Rambo himself looks a whole lot like Sylvester Stallone, and a lot of the scars look like they came from the movie. But still, overall, a fun toy line. There are quite a few figures, I would say 12 in the standard series, and then there are 6 in the series too. So I think 18 figures total that you can collect for this toy line. And then there's variations for Joxa and Glasslight for Brazil and Argentina. And so getting all of these figures and then getting the variants could be a challenge if you wanted to go and get the Series 2 and all of those. But still, fun toy line with the helicopter, the Skywolf jet, the Defender 6x6, and of course, the playset. The playset is a lot of fun. Number 6 on my list is Kenner Centurions. Again, another Kenner item that's on my list. And the thing about these, they are 7.5 inch tall figures, and they are a lot of fun. I did take a look at pretty much everything Kenner Centurions on the channel so far, but I am looking forward to some of the newer ones. But as the cartoon was a whole lot of fun from back in the day, and some of the unreleased figures out there leave collectors wanting a lot more. Hopefully we get some of these unreleased characters in the modern iteration with Ramen Toy, such as that. But trying to track down Traumatizer and some of the suits, such as Seabat and Swing Shot, those are getting a little bit harder to find, and especially harder to find with all the parts. But Kenner Centurions, one of the best toy lines of the 80s. Number 5 on my list is Bionic 6. Bionic 6 is a toy line from LJN from back in the 80s, and it did come later in the 80s. The thing about this toy line is the fact that it is made of die-cast metal, translucent parts, and the figures are a lot of fun, but not as posable as they should be. There are also 4 smaller vehicles and the bigger Mule's van vehicle, but the playset was interesting. As an adult, I didn't know that they even made this thing. When I found out they did, it was quite confusing and hard to track down. Still hard to track down today. Like a lot of playsets from the 80s and what are considered failed toy lines, they're hard to track down, these playsets. But still, whole lot of fun with the secret headquarters and this toy line of 13 action figures if you count Fluffy, about 5 vehicles, and the playset. Number 4 on my list is Kid or Mask. Now, Kid or Mask is a fun toy line from the 80s, and the little 2.5-inch figures there were not really the draw. The draw was the vehicles. The vehicles and their transforming mechanisms going from just a seemingly normal vehicle into an attack mode vehicle. So, Mask, a fun toy line. Maybe it'll get resurrected again. Maybe it won't. There's still a lot of it out there. Still, most of it is pretty easy to get, except for in the later series or some of the parts and pieces that are easily lost. They might command a little bit higher price, but still, overall, fun toy line, and the cartoon rocked, literally. Number 3 on my list is G.I. Joe from Hasbro from back in the day, the 3.75-inch line, not the 12-inch line. Now, the Real American Hero toy line went on for what seemed like forever, and some could argue it never stopped. But when you look at this, these figures are really good-looking figures, and they all seem to have something different about them. Now, the earlier ones with straight arms all looked very similar, and now as you get into like 86, when they really started blowing up, it was awesome. It was an awesome year, and that whole run of original Joes was a lot of fun. But now there's so many to collect. To try to get them all complete, starts to get challenging. But they had a ton of vehicles. Now, the thing about G.I. Joe is a lot of people really do like the characters. And the vehicles are awesome, but the characters are driving the toy line. So when you look at this, various different play sets and vehicles create great play areas, and they also make for amazing display potential. Number 2 on my list is Vintage Transformers, the G1 era. Now, the show was awesome. It was a fun show, a fun toy line, and the transforming gimmick really did get kids to think. Think about the possibilities of the future. Think about every single vehicle out there would have turned into Bumblebee or Mirage. And could we ever see a Jetfire? So, lots of fun, lots of excitement. They did use the rub signs and rub symbols and those kinds of things. And they branched out. I think a lot of people also believe that the G1 had a pivotal shift in 1986 with the movie, lost a lot of collectors, but gained a lot of new ones. So for that, that's still a controversy that rages on today. And again, is it Hot Rod's fault that Prime died? And number 1 on my list of 80s toy lines that wins is Star Wars. Kenner Star Wars, although started in the late 70s, got its stride in the 80s. Well, 1980, when Empire Strikes Back came out, it really destroyed all the other toy lines, and it was the best. Now, it did capture my imagination for the longest time, but it didn't take me very long to grow out of it. I think 1984, you could stick a fork in it, it was done, but it did run and reign supreme. Now, these are only 5 POA figures. Most have just one accessory to go with them, so still, today, it's not that hard to collect. Some of the rarest ones are getting reproduced by Stan Solo and Smith Creations or something like that. So you can still get a reproduction of the very rare ones to make your collection look good. But I'm growing tired of what Hasbro's doing with the modern stuff. But I look back to the vintage, and it doesn't take away my love for the vintage toy line. So a lot of charm to all of the vehicles that they made. And Kenner had all of the gimmicks and action features to make them more fun. And they seem to be more fun than a lot of the toys that are getting made today. And they did a pretty good job back then with the limits of technology and price point and budget. So I have to commend Kenner on such a great toy line from the 80s. Let me know what you think about these toy lines. What should I have put on this list? Of course, it's my list, so I just want to know what other people think out there from the 80s. And if you think about it, a lot of toy lines we think of from the 80s might be from the late 70s or from the early 90s. But I tried to make sure all of these were 80s toy lines and 80 properties. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like and subscribe. Tydirium here out.